Hello learners, my name is Sukhendu and I'm a social work professional. I've been working in this sector for the last 16 years and I have been working with many issues ranging from issues relating to child rights, child protection, to disaster management, to child development, to youth development, as well as when dealing with issues relating to natural resource management. So in today's lesson, we would focus on some of the key issues that are relating to children in this country. So the topic for today's session would be social work and its intervention with regard to children in ensuring child rights. So the topic is like the module for today's session is application of social work methods in social milieu. And the unit that we would deal with in this session is on demographic profile of children and child rights. So let us start with a very brief illustration about the situation of children in our country. As you all know, child is a very important aspect for the social work, and there are many schemes that the government have as well as civil society organizations. They have been working with this issue for generations. So if we think of children as a whole is considered as the present as well as the future of any nation. In fact, there are scholars who tend to highlight children as being an insulation that isolates human society from its existence and evolution to the verge of its extinction. So, in that sense, it clearly shows that how important is children for humans, for human society, for human civilization, and ensuring its future. And but then when it comes to children as a whole, they have also considered to be one of the most vulnerable sections that we have in the entire human society. For generations, children have been a subject of brutal forms of neglect, abuse, and exploitation. With the government, with the policymakers, with the civil society organizations, safeguarding and promoting the interest of children have been a matter of priority, and through the course of time there are many legislative policy frameworks that were formulated and implemented by the government for protection and safeguarding the rights and interest of children. But despite all these efforts that has been put in by the government as well as by the civil society organizations, children remains as a very vulnerable section, and the nature of vulnerability that persists with children, they exist in vivid forms in different dimensions and the magnitude as well. So forms of social maladies like that of child marriage, child trafficking, child labor, child sexual abuse, child involved in unlawful activities, malnourishment still exist as a very dominant social phenomena in this country. In consideration with the multidimensional, the complex and intersectorial nature of problems that exist with children, the intervention on the part of social work as being a very dynamic professional discipline have been constant, systematic, multisectorial, and multidimensional. So when it comes to today's topic, the main objective of this discussion would be to develop a uniform and enhanced level of understanding among students on some of the aspects that includes definition of children with regard to various legislative and policy framework, demographic profile of children in India, major problems and challenges that are being faced by children, with the emphasis on the nature of such problems, magnitude, the dimensions of such adversaries. Concept and principles of child rights would be also a very important issue for discussion. And in today's topic, we would also focus on the child rights in terms of its concepts, in terms of its nature and types that have been advocated by international as well as national policy framework. And towards the end of it, we'd also have a discussion on the nature of social work interventions being initiated in promoting child rights with a focus on thematic aspects like education, health, child protection, and child participation. So let us begin with a brief on the definition of child as being specified under various legislative and policy framework, referring to some of the national and international policies that were framed for children, as well as some of the important social legislations that we have in this country that tries to define a child based on the age criteria. So in that sense, when it comes to definition of a child, the criteria of age is considered as a very important parameter for formulating such. By and large, in India, we have quite a number of social legislations and social policies that tries to define child in different ways, considering the age criteria. So we would start with the first definition, which has been advocated by a legislation called Juvenile Justice, Care and Protection of Children's Act 2015. So I believe most of you have heard of the JJ Act, or better known as Juvenile Justice, Care and Protection of Children's Act 2015. So according to this legislation, Section 2 of the JJ Act, it says that any individual who has not completed the age of 18 years is a child. So in that sense, an individual, he or she can be a boy or a girl if they have not completed the age of 18 years, so they can be designated as a child. So this is a definition which has wider acceptance with the scholars, academicians, as well as social work practitioners. The next legislation that we would discuss about would be a legislation called Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act 2015, or it's better known as POCSO. So this is a legislation that came to existence in the year 2012, and according to this legislation, an individual who has not completed the age of 18 years, regardless of their gender, can be considered as a child. Whereas when we think of child marriage, and child marriage being a very dominant phenomena in this country, so we also have a legislation that focuses on prohibition of child marriage in this country. So it's known as Prohibition of Child Marriage Act 2006. So it is also better known as PCMA, or Prohibition of Child Marriage Act 2006. So according to this legislation, so there are two different definitions that has been framed for boys and girls. It says an individual, if male, and if he has not completed the age of 21 years, so he can be considered as a child. And for females, if they have not completed the age of 18 years, they can also be termed as a child. So as far as this legislation is concerned, so it advocates for having two different standards for boys and girls when it comes to defining a child. The next legislation that we would focus on in terms of the definition that has been advocated is the Child Labor Prohibition and Regulation Act 1986. According to the Child Labor Prohibition Regulation Act 1986, any individual who has not completed the age of 14 years is considered as a child, and an individual who has completed the age of 14 years, maybe from 15 till 18 years, is considered as an adolescent. So, as far as this legislation is concerned, so it emphasizes on the fact that any individual who has not completed the age of 14 years is a child. With the Factories Act, which came into existence in the year 1948, it says that an individual who is below the age of 14 years is a child. The Mines Act, which came into existence in the year 1952, it says about 18 years. In other words, any individual who is below the age of 18 years is a child. And this same criteria that we have, that has been advocated by the Juvenile Justice Act, by POCSO, by the Mines Act, also features in other legislations which was drafted and formulated even before the Indian independence. So the Indian Contract Act, which was formulated in the year way back in 1892, it also says that an individual who has not completed the age of 18 years can be considered as a minor, and the same criteria was also upheld in the legislation that we had with the Indians Majority Act 1994. Now we would focus on some of the standards which were propagated by two very important policy that we have with children. The first one, it's a national policy. So as far as the national child policy, which was formulated in the year 2013, it says that any individual who has not completed the age of 18 years is a child. But with regard to the UNCRC, or the United Nations Convention on Rights of the Child, which came into existence in the year 1989 and which was ratified by the Indian government in the year 1992, the first article of this convention, of this widely accepted convention, it says that an individual, regardless of their gender, if they have not completed the age of 18 years, can be considered, or should be considered rather, as a child. So from this very brief discussion that we had with regard to the definition of child, it becomes very clear that with regard to the legislations, with regard to the policies that we have nationally as well as internationally, there are differences that we have, taking into consideration the age criteria, but by and large, with most of the legislations that we have in this country, the social legislations rather, so by and large, it is widely accepted that individuals who have not completed the age of 18 years is considered as child, though there are differences citing to specific legislations like Prohibition of Child Marriage Act, the Child Labor Prohibition Regulation Act, and the Factories Act, which tries to define child in a different way, like a child, if they have not completed the age of 14 years, can be considered as a child. In the next session, we would deal with the demographic profile that we have with regard to children in the context of this country. So, referring to some of the estimates that we have from various UN agencies, as well as with regard to the census and different other assessments that were conducted by the Indian government, we would try to develop a very clear cut understanding about the population that we have with children in this country, as well as referring to some very important statistical parameters that we consider in social work when in terms of developing projects, in terms of implementing policy frameworks as well. So internationally, it is estimated that around 19% of the total child population that we have in this world actually lives in India. So in that sense, India is considered as a nation with the largest child population in the world. According to estimates that were propagated by the United Nations Department of Economics and Social Affairs Population Division, in the year 2024, the estimated child population in this country was projected to be around 43 crores 66 lakhs 37,126. However, according to NIPSID, the projected child population in the same year was around 44 crores 83 lakhs 14,000 individuals. And when we are thinking of this definition, child means an individual who is below the age of 18 years. So, in other words, according to the United Nations Department of Economics and Social Affairs, like referring to the year 2024, the estimated child population in this country, or else the estimated number of individuals below the age of 18 years in this country, was more than 43.6 crores, whereas according to NIPSID, the estimated child population in this country below the age of 18 years was more than 44.8 crores. If we refer to the inferences that were drawn by the 2011 census, the child population below the age of 14 years was around 37 crores 24 lakhs 44,116. So this is a figure which was calculated in accordance with the findings of the census study which was conducted in the year 2011. And out of this total population below the age of 14 years, about 19 crores 43 lakh 51,375 were males, and 17 crores 80 lakhs 92,741 were females. So in that sense, the number of males below the age of 14 years was more to that of female. Okay, and with regard to the contribution of the same group of population referring to rural and urban area, so out of the total rural population that we had in this country in the year 2011, about 32.82% of the total rural population was actually comprised of individuals who were below the age of 14 years. And with regard to the urban population that existed in the year 2011, about 26.21% of the total urban population was comprised of individuals who were below the age of 14 years. So in that sense, so in terms of proportion, the proportion of child population in urban areas was more in urban areas was less as compared to that of the rural population, rural areas. One of the very important parameters that we consider in social work while designing and implementing any project policies with regard to children from the ambit of gender equality is child sex ratio. So in that sense, child sex ratio is considered to be a very important parameter in social work domain when we are designing any projects from the ambit of gender equality for children. So with regard to the child sex ratio in India in the year 2001, the child sex ratio in this country was 927. So, in that sense, it means that for every 1,000 male child in the age group of 0 to 6 years, we were having 927 female child, which actually decreased significantly in the year 2011. So in 2011, the child sex ratio in this country was 919 as compared to that of 927 which was there in 2001. So between this decade, like between the two census which was conducted in 2001 and 2011, so there was a significant decrease in the child sex ratio. So this is a very important trend that was showcased, that was analyzed through this census data. So with regard to the states which are having high child sex ratio, in the year 2011, Arunachal Pradesh was the state with the highest child sex ratio in the country, with 972 female children for every 1,000 male children within the age group of 0 to 6 years, whereas Haryana was the state with the lowest child sex ratio of 834 female for every 1,000 male child within the same age group. According to the 2011 census, the rural and urban child sex ratio were 923 and 905 respectively. So in that sense, the child sex ratio in rural areas was comparatively better to that of what we have in urban areas. Next, we would discuss about the major problems and challenges that are faced by children in this country. So, the first concern that we would discuss will be child marriage. For generations, child marriage has been an issue of major concern, not only with India but with most of the nations that are known to us. In fact, when we think of India, India serves as the land with highest incidences of child marriage in the world. In other words, in India, the instances of child marriage that happens is the highest in the world in terms of their numbers. According to the National Family Health Survey 5, the rate of child marriage that was experienced during the period 2018 to 2021 was about 23.3%. So, in other words, among all the marriages which were solemnized during this period, about 23.3% of such marriages were actually child marriages, and this is something that has been estimated by the National Family Health Survey, which was conducted during the same period. As for the NFHS 5 data, about 43% of women aged 20 to 24 years were married by the age of 20, and about 61% of all women who got married during the same period, they were below the age of 21 years. So in that sense, it signifies that child marriage is still a very dominant phenomena in contemporary Indian society. About the same study, it says that about 48% of girls with no education got married below the age of 18 years. So that tends to show how important is education when it comes to prevention of child marriage in this country, because if we refer to the findings of this data and if we try to analyze it in a more elaborate way, it says that out of the entire lot of girls who were below the age of 18 years and had never gone to school and they have not got any education, about 48% of them they got married before the time they reached 18 years. So the same survey also signifies the fact that there is a relation that we have between higher incidences of child marriage and socioeconomic conditions of respective families. So it says that about 40% of girls from low quotient got married before they attained 18 years of age. And if we go with the state-wise segregation of child marriage data as depicted by the National Family Health Survey 5, it says that West Bengal, Bihar, and Tripura are three states with the highest rate of child marriage in the country. And in all these three states, the rate of child marriage was reported as being more than 40%. Okay, so this is also a very important uh, data when we think of the proximity of child marriage from the perspective of state-wise segregation and distribution. Next, we would discuss with one more very important problems that are generally encountered by children not only in this country but across the world. So it's child labor. I think like many of you have heard of this term called child labor. So before that, we need to have a clear-cut understanding of what we mean by child labor in this country. So according to many legislative framework as well as some of the policies that we have in this country, it says that an individual who has not completed the age of 14 years is a child, and if that very individual is engaged with some type of work either for or without any benefit, economic benefit, so such individuals can be termed as child labor. Though with UNICEF and with the census, they have some different definitions to that. So India, when we think of the world scenario, India is considered as a country with the largest child labor population in the world. So in other words, in India, the number of child laborers that we have is among the highest in the world. According to the 2011 census, about 10.12 million child laborers are there in this country. There are estimates which comes from United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, and this suggests that 70% of the child labor population that we have in this country is actually engaged with agricultural activity. So when we think of child labor and the sectors where they are getting engaged. So in this country, agriculture sector is considered as a sector which employs the largest number of child labor. Okay, so and this is something that also manifest in terms of the estimates which has come from different UN agencies like United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization as well as the International Labour Organization. According to UNICEF, about 90% of child labor in India are in rural areas. So when we think of child labor, we think of them engaged in factories, in eateries, and which are mainly located in urban and semi-urban areas. But that's not true. So according to the data that we have from UNICEF as well as from other international organizations, so the incidences of child labor is far more in rural areas as what we have when we compare it with urban areas. And the larger chunk of the child labor population in this country actually gets employed in the agricultural sector. And with the agricultural sector, it becomes extremely difficult for the policy implementing agencies, the law enforcement agencies to identify and detect cases of child labor. Okay, so it's very difficult. Next, we would discuss about one more very important and a very significant problem that we have with children, not only at the national level but internationally, and it's child trafficking. I think like most of you have come across this term called child trafficking. Again, child trafficking is a international phenomenon. According to UNICEF, about 1.2 million children are trafficked every year across the globe. And in India, like incidences of child trafficking is also estimated and it's also reported to be extremely high as well. So if we refer to the National Crime Record Bureau data that we have for the year 2019, about 3,466 cases of child trafficking were reported in this country. In the year 2022, about 83,000 children in India were reported as being missing. So with regard to trafficking, India is considered as the source area, as a transit area, as well as a destination. In terms of source, we mean an individual if being trafficked from where. So that very area is considered as the source. The area through which that individual is being trafficked is called as transit, and the ultimate destination, the ultimate area where he or she is being trafficked to is considered as the destination area. So in that sense, India is considered as a source area for trafficking, transit area, as well as a destination area. In other words, people from, especially child from India, they get trafficked, as well as they, like when you think of the international trafficking network, for some of the countries, India is considered as a transit point for trafficking, and to some extent, India is also considered as a destination area for child trafficking. In terms of incidences of trafficking that has been reported in various states, West Bengal, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, and Maharashtra are considered to be states with higher incidences of child trafficking that have been reported over the years. When we consider of what happens after they are trafficked, so definitely they are engaged with some type of exploitative practices. So in India, referring to the data that we have received from different government agencies as well as estimates that we have received from different UN agencies, it says that out of the total trafficking, like child who are trafficked, most of them they are engaged into forced labor, followed by sexual exploitation. Some of the child are also trafficked for early marriage, and some of them also are engaged as domestic workers. The next that we would discuss about in terms of problems and challenges that are being faced by children is, so with regard to children, child sexual abuse is also considered to be a very important issue of concern with children, not only in this country but internationally. But for today's discussion, we would focus on incidences of sexual abuse that we are experiencing with children in this country. According to the National Crime Record Bureau data that we have for the year 2022, a total of 1,62,000 incidences of child abuse were reported in this country during that year. Furthermore, we would also refer to the findings of a longitudinal study which was conducted by UNICEF between the year 2005 to 2013. It says that CSA in Indian girls was reported to be as high as 42%. As per the NCERT data that we have for the year 2022, about 37,907 cases were reported under various sections of POCSO, or better known as Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act 2012. In about 96.8% of such cases, the offenders were actually known to the victims. That tends to show that a majority of the offenses relating to child sexual abuse, it's happening, and the main perpetrators were reported to be as individuals who were already known to the victims. So this is a very important, findings that we should consider when we think of designing projects and when we think of coming up with initiatives relating awareness generation and sensitizations that most the civil society organizations they're conducting at the grassroots level, because this is an angle of it that we should also say to the parents. This is also very important. Among states, Maharashtra was the state with the highest incidences of child sexual abuse which were reported during that same period. About 4,117 cases of child sexual abuse were reported in Maharashtra during the year 2022 under various sections of POCSO, followed by Madhya Pradesh and Tamil Nadu at 3,618 and 3,615 cases of POCSO being reported during the year respectively. Among cities, Delhi was the city with the highest incidences of child sexual abuse which were reported under POCSO during the year 2022. Lastly, we would have a discussion on another very important challenge that are being faced by children in India, and that is malnourishment. So it says that India is the country with the largest malnourished child population in the world. Okay. It says that there are estimates internationally which says that more than one third of the world's malnourished children actually live in India. If we refer to the findings which were published by the 2023 Global Hunger Index, India ranks at 111th out of 125 countries. So, in terms of some of the statistics that we are having with regard to child malnourishment among children, India has the highest child wasting rate in the world with 18.7%. Furthermore, about 35.5% of children under 5 years are having their growth stunted. So, this is also a very important figure which tends to show that malnourishment is an issue of great concern in India, and this is an area that we need to focus around both from the perspective of the government as well as the civil society organizations. So the next thing that we would discuss in this session would be child rights. So the first thing that we would do is about developing a basic understanding of what we mean by when we consider this term called child rights. So child rights are generally considered as fundamental freedoms that are inherited by all human beings below the age of 18 years. So in that sense, every individual below the age of 18 years, regardless of their color, race, sex, language, religion, nation, or social origin, they should enjoy child rights. The next thing that we would discuss is about child rights. It's some of the basic principles that actually governs child rights. So the first principle, it's about inheritance. Inherited. Each and every child right is inherited in nature. In other words, a child is born with his or her rights. All child rights are inalienable in the sense that no one can take rights out of a child or a child if he or she even wants, they cannot give it up. So, in that sense, child rights are inalienable. Child rights are always universal. So, it applies to every individual who is below the age of 18 years, regardless of their gender, sex, identity in terms of nationality. So, every individual in the world who are below the age of 18 years is guaranteed of having some rights, and these are called as child rights. So, in that sense, child rights are universal in nature. All child rights are equal, and there is nothing called superior or inferior rights, as each and every child right has been perceived as extremely important for a child. Child rights are also considered as interrelated and interdependent. So, the fulfillment of one child rights actually determines whether the child would also enjoy the other rights as well. So, in that sense, each and every child rights, they are interrelated and they are interdependent. In the next session, we would discuss about the rights that has been advocated by the Indian Constitution. With the Indian Constitution, we don't have any specific article that defines child particularly, but there are a number of constitutional provisions that we have under Part 3 as well as Part 4. Part 3 basically deals with fundamental rights. So there are a number of constitutional provisions that features under fundamental rights which do speak of child rights. The first one is Article 14. Article 14 it's about right to equality. It says that all are equal before the law. So in that sense, when it comes to children, so their stake is also safeguarded by this section, by this article, which gives them equal opportunity to access judicial services. The next article that we focus on is Article 15, which speaks of prohibition of discrimination, right against discrimination. However, in this same article, there is a clause 3, Article 15, clause C of the Indian Constitution. It says that the state would have special power to come up with special provisions for ensuring protection and development of women and children. So, in that sense, Article 15 clause 3 it also provides empowers government with special provisions to make positive form of discrimination to safeguard and promote the interest of women and children. Article 21 of the Indian Constitution it advocates for right to education. So it says that an individual who is below, which between the age group of 6 to 14 years would have fundamental right to free and compulsory education. Article 22, it speaks against illegal arrest and detention. Article 23, it speaks against trafficking in human being and beggary and other forms of forced labor. Article 24, very important article, it speaks of prohibition of child labor. It says that any individual below the age of 14 years cannot be engaged in any hazardous employment. Article 45 is also very important, which is also a directive principles of the state policy. It falls under the directive principle of the state policy. It says that an individual below the age of 6 years would have right to early care and education. So with regard to all the services that we have that are focused around ECC, like early care and education oriented services, the foundation of it is Article 45. So I think through these sessions, we have been able to develop a basic, at least a basic level of understanding and orientation about children, the situation of children in this country, both in terms of their demographic profile as well as in terms of the challenges that they're facing and the child rights scenario in this country. Lastly, with regard to child rights, we would speak about some of the international framework that we have which speaks for and which upholds child rights as a very important component. So, with regard to the United Nations, so there is a very important convention which came into existence and which was ratified by the General Assembly in the year 1989, and the name of that convention is United Nations Convention on Rights of the Child. So, this is a convention which is the most widely ratified treaty in the world. And with regard to this convention, India ratified this thing in the year 1992. So, with regard to many national and international legislations that we have worldwide, including in this country, and even after 1992, there were many amendments which were conducted in existing social legislations that focuses on child rights and child development. The basis for this is UNCRC. So UNCRC speaks of many child rights which have been grouped into four broader categories, and they are also called as four broader rights. And it says that survival, protection, development, and participation. So these are the four broader categories under which you have a number of rights being specified for children. So if we think of right to survival is a broader right for the child under which you have right to life, right to attainable standard of health, right to nutrition, right to adequate standard of living, right to a name, and right to a nationality for a child. So these are some of the child rights that you have which have been clubbed under right to survival, which is a broader right. The next category that we have, it's about protection, right to protection. Under right to protection, the UNCRC specified right for the child to be protected from all forms of exploitation, abuse, inhuman treatment, neglect, and it also advocates for having special protection for children during emergency circumstances like natural calamities, armed conflict, and disablement. When it comes to the developmental rights, right to development, the right to development is again a broader category and it includes right to education, right to be supported for early child development and care, right to social security, right to leisure, recreation, and cultural activity. The next thing is participation. So when we think of participation, right to participation, it advocates for child to have right in terms of respecting for the views of children, freedom of expression, access to appropriate information, freedom of thought, conscience, and freedom to preach their own religion. So that's all from me in terms of when we are thinking of this topic that focuses on child demography, that focuses on the challenges that are being faced by child in this country, as well as we have also discussed about some of the major rights that has been advocated by the policy framework both nationally as well as internationally. Thank you, student.